I never thought the start of my adult life would be based on a lie. One wrapped in a silk dress and sealed with a wedding ring. That expensive white gown hung in front of me like a well-decorated trap, and behind me stood my mother, her grip firm around my wrists like someone far too used to being in control. Her voice was cold and sharp. "Amy's not coming. You have to take her place. There's no other way, Emma." I was only 25 back then. I had just finished my degree in interior design and had dreams of starting my own life, my career. Never once did I think I'd be stepping into adulthood pretending to be someone else, especially not my sister. Amy was 3 years older than I, always the favorite, always the focus of everything in our family. Every plan, every expectation was built around her. But then, just 3 days before her wedding to a man she never cared about, she vanished. "If this wedding falls apart, we lose everything," my mother warned, her eyes slicing through me like a blade. "You owe us this." That word, "oh," it had followed me my whole life. I owed them because I wasn't Amy, because I was the second-born, because I once refused to work for free as Dad's assistant. Now, I owed them this marriage, this mess Amy had abandoned. She didn't leave an explanation, just a short message. "Emma, I can't live like this.
I'm sorry."
But I couldn't run. I never had that choice. I was the one who stayed, the one who cleaned up the mess, the one who kept moving forward. For the last 6 months, I'd been talking to Amy's fiancé, Brian Warren, pretending to be her. On every call, every message, I played the part. Brian was a successful businessman who had lost his vision 3 years ago in an accident, but even after that, he built a name for himself in the medical tech world. I'd never met him, but I knew how he sounded when he was tired, how he started his mornings, how he breathed when silence stretched too long. It started as something small, just a favor, a one-time thing. Amy didn't like talking to blind people. "It throws me off," she said. My mother barely looked at me when she added, "Your voice is close enough to hers. Just help your sister." And so I did. I adjusted my tone to sound like Amy. I laughed the way she did. I memorized her old messages to answer like she would. I even started wearing her perfume. Brian never suspected a thing. Each call felt like a private performance where I played both roles, and no one else knew. And now, here I was, standing in front of a mirror inside the Gracefield Church dressing room. This was the place where the wedding would be live-streamed by Brian's family company. My mother shut the door behind us. I heard the soft rustle of the gown and smelled the fancy perfume woven into the fabric. She didn't say a word. Instead, she walked up and clasped a sparkling diamond necklace around my neck like she was sealing a deal. "All you have to do is walk down the aisle, sign the marriage certificate, be his wife for a few months," she said flatly. "After that, disappear if you want." She made it sound so easy, like she was giving me stage directions for a play. I didn't reply. Not because I agreed, but because my throat had locked up and I couldn't speak. At the other end of the aisle, Brian Warren stood tall in a black suit. His posture was calm, his eyes gently closed. His face looked peaceful, like he was listening closely to a world I hadn't yet stepped into. I swallowed hard and started walking toward him. Every step felt like I was falling into a deep hole where there was no bottom, just the hope that he'd never truly see me and I'd never have to be seen. But a tiny voice inside my heart whispered a terrifying question. If he found out I wasn't Amy, would he ever forgive me? The sound of clapping exploded through the church as I said, "I do," under the high, decorated ceiling. The chandeliers scattered light all around, and I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrored walls. This was a bride no one had even asked for her consent. Brian stood beside me, gently holding my hand. Not too tightly, but just enough to let me know he felt something. Maybe it was my perfume being different. Or maybe he felt how fast my heart was beating. I couldn't hide it. Even though Brian couldn't see me, there was something in the way he stayed silent that made me feel like he was looking right into me, with something stronger than sight. The reception felt like a perfectly staged play. Fancy drinks, polished speeches, fake smiles. My mother floated through the crowd like a politician who just won a major deal. Meanwhile, I sat beside Brian at a long table covered in satin, pretending to eat while nervously pushing food around my plate. Brian didn't speak much, but I could tell by the way he tilted his head and stayed still. He was listening. Every time my fork hit the plate or I shifted in my chair, he noticed. After the party, I followed him into a sleek black limousine. The city lights faded behind us as we drove toward the Warren estate by Lake Magnolia. I'd seen pictures of the place, a large wooden house with a sloped roof, a stone path, and tall pine trees. But now, all I saw were shadows and blurry outlines through the car window. Sitting beside Brian, the man who is now my husband, everything felt surreal. He was still a stranger. "You're trembling," Brian said suddenly. His eyes stayed closed, his voice calm and low. I flinched, then let out a soft laugh to cover it up. "Just a bit tired." "No," he replied. "Your voice, it's different. Softer. Slower than usual." I quickly turned my face toward the window, gripping the edge of my dress. My mind raced through ways to escape the moment. Should I deny it? Should I laugh it off? Blame the nerves? "Maybe it's just the wedding nerves," I whispered. He didn't say anything right away. Then I heard him take in a long, deep breath like he was trying to place a smell. "You're not wearing your usual perfume." I turned my head toward him. His eyes were still closed, but his words cut right through me. I had spent months building this disguise, and now it was starting to crack. "I forgot," I said softly. Silence settled between us. The car rolled along the road, tires whispering against the pavement. I fiddled with the ring on my finger, metal clicking against my skin. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't expected. Brian couldn't see, but somehow, he made me feel more seen than anyone ever had. He didn't need eyes. Brian didn't need eyes to know I wasn't Amy. A small change in my tone, a shift in my breath, even just the quiet way I sat, he could sense something was different. He always could. When we reached the estate, the house didn't welcome us with warmth. Instead, it stood there in elegant silence. The air inside was still and cold, like a place too used to secrets. Marble floors gleamed under soft lights that lit up automatically as we stepped in, quiet and controlled, just like everything else around Brian. He led me straight to the dining room. There was no champagne, no late-night toasts, no celebration. Just 2 chairs, 2 plates, and a warm light shining gently above the table. He sat across from me, his posture steady. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you remember our first call?" I froze. Under the table, I squeezed my hands together. Amy once told me she gave up on those early phone calls after a few weeks. I had no idea which one he was talking about. I couldn't answer him. Not without giving myself away. Brian tilted his head slightly. His voice softened. "I told you about the lake house in Vermont. You said you'd want to open a flower shop there, right?" I swallowed and nodded. Yes." He gave the tiniest nod, then quietly said something that made my entire body go cold. "Amy never liked flowers." I froze in place. My instincts told me to run, to bolt out of that room. But instead, I sat perfectly still. My spoon slipped from my hand as I leaned forward slightly, caught in the moment. And then came the real blow. "Is there something you want to tell me, Emma?" He said my name. Emma. Not Amy. Not darling. No nickname from the script. My real name. My heart squeezed. I bit my lip hard to stop the tears that were building up. They almost spilled right into the untouched soup in front of me. That's when I knew he was starting to see through everything. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. Soft gray light had just begun to sneak in behind the thick curtains. I was already in the kitchen, carefully learning how to make Brian's favorite tea. No sugar. 1 thin slice of lemon. Water is heated to exactly 180 degrees Fahrenheit. I wasn't doing it to keep up the lie anymore. I wasn't trying to be Amy. I just wanted him to have a peaceful morning. I wanted him to feel cared for. Just once. Without conditions, without tricks. When Brian came down, his hair was still damp from a shower. He ran his hand slowly along the wooden stair railing, finding his way with calm confidence. Just as I was about to place his cup on the table, I set it to the left side instead of the right. I didn't even think about it. He brushed the handle and paused. You placed it on the left, he said casually, like he was talking about the weather. I looked up. That's your dominant side. He gave a faint smile. Amy never paid attention to that. He didn't say it with anger or suspicion. There was no blame in his voice. But I felt like he had seen right through me again. Not with eyes, but with something much deeper. He sat down quietly, gently touching the edge of the table with his fingertips. I poured his tea slowly, hands steady but heart racing. In the back of my mind, I could still hear my mother's voice. And Amy's. Don't let him find out. But each day, it was getting harder to pretend. The mask was slipping. Over the next few days, I stopped calling the staff to tidy up Brian's space. I started doing it myself. I wiped the tables, made the bed, and even went into the library, an untouched room no one had entered since the accident that took his sight. I touched each book gently, ran my fingers along old pens. And I imagined the man Brian used to be. Before the fame, before the money. Just a man who loved to read, who wrote neat notes in margins, who left thank you messages on the first page of every book he gave someone. One afternoon, I was standing by a bookshelf, quietly arranging the novels by size, when Brian appeared at the door. He reached out and let his hand trail along the desk's edge. Amy never came in here, he whispered. I know, I said quietly, still facing the bookshelf. I just thought you might feel more at ease if it wasn't covered in dust. He didn't respond, but I heard the small creak of the chair as his hand tightened around it, like he was trying to hold on to something slipping away. The next day, I asked him to go for a walk in the garden behind the estate. To my surprise, he left his cane behind. He walked slowly. I held his wrist gently, not just to guide him, but to let him feel the rhythm of my steps. I described everything as we moved. The blooming lavender, the burnt orange maple leaves. He didn't say much. But when I told him about the deep red dahlias growing in the far corner, he suddenly asked, Why don't you talk about tulips anymore? I stopped walking. Tulips were Amy's favorite. Not mine. I forced a smile. I just thought other flowers deserved a moment today. He smiled softly. The first real smile I'd seen since the wedding. It was small but real. That night, I read to him in the living room. Not one of Amy's Shakespeare choices. I picked a quiet, gentle story. One about a girl who got lost and only found her way back after she stopped pretending to be someone else. When I stopped reading, Brian turned his head toward me. Your voice is different, he said. I stayed silent. It's warmer. And the way you touch me, it's different too. Softer. Not like someone pretending. I placed the book down, gripping the edge of my nightgown. My heart felt like it would burst. Then he said, If you're someone else, I think I might like that person more. My chest tightened. Not because I was scared he'd expose me, but because I realized he might see me. Me. Not the mask. Not the act. And just before I could say a word, he added, like a quiet truth that needed no proof, I don't need eyes to know what's real. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the glow from the garden lights dance across the lake surface. I had entered this marriage pretending. But now, every word I spoke, every gesture I made, it wasn't part of a lie anymore. It was me. The next morning, I was dusting the picture frames in the library. The ones Brian said no one had touched in years. The house was quiet, peaceful. Then, a loud knock shattered everything. Before I could even move, the door burst open. My mother walked in first, flawless as ever. Beige dress, sparkling handbag, not a single hair out of place. She looked like a politician about to give a speech. A threat disguised as elegance. And behind her, Amy. Her golden curls were perfectly styled. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor like this house had always been hers. We need to talk, my mother said firmly as her eyes scanned the room like she was inspecting a crime scene. It was as if she wanted to see how much of the space I had dared to touch. I quietly put the cleaning cloth on the table and turned to face her and Amy. I thought it was already obvious what was going on. Amy let out a sharp laugh, her tone full of sarcasm. Clear? Emma, Do you honestly think you're living inside some romantic fairy tale? You were just supposed to fill in, not take over. I didn't say a word. Not because I was speechless, but because I already knew what was coming. I had heard this same speech my entire life. I knew all the lines by heart. My mother walked up close to me, her words cutting like a blade. Do you even understand what's at stake? He's about to open company shares to the State Medical Alliance. You think long walks and bedtime stories will be enough to hold your place in his life? Amy crossed her arms and slowly walked around the library like she owned it, like she was inspecting a mess I had made. You've crossed a line, she said. The staff's calling you Mrs. Warren. I stood still and looked her directly in the eye. Because legally I'm the one who signed the marriage certificate. She laughed like I had just told her a joke. Legal doesn't mean real. He's mine. You know that. My hands clenched into fists. My heart was racing, but not because I was scared. I wasn't angry with myself. I was angry for Brian. Amy, I said, my voice steady and low, he's not some prize to be handed off to benefit the family. He's not a trophy. My mother frowned. What are you trying to say? I'm saying, for the first time in my life, someone saw me. Not just as Amy's sister. Not as someone to pity. He saw me. And he deserves someone who truly cares about him, not someone chasing shares and press. Amy stepped closer, her face right in front of mine. Do you love him? She asked. I didn't flinch. I don't know what to name this feeling yet. But I do know this. If one day Brian opens his eyes and decides to walk away, I'll still be thankful. Because I got to love someone honestly, without pretending. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy, like everything had stopped moving. A thick silence wrapped around us, pressing in. Then my mother spoke, her words sharp like scissors. Don't fool yourself, Emma. You were never meant to be at the center. Your place is on the sidelines. That's where you've always been best. I turned away from her and picked up one of Brian's old books from the table. The leather cover was soft and worn, and the corners were slightly bent. Inside, on the first page, he had written in neat handwriting, "Every road has a turn. What matters is who's holding your hand when it does." I turned back toward them. My eyes were no longer unsure. You can think I'm weak. Amy can think I'm just playing pretend. But at least I've been real. You ran from a man who treated you with respect. And now you're back, not because you miss him, but because you miss the title. Amy narrowed her eyes at me, but I saw something shift in her expression. There was something empty behind her anger. Like, even she knew she had lost something she couldn't get back. That's when the door opened. Brian stood there, one hand resting gently on the frame. I guess I should let everyone speak their truth, he said, his voice calm but unshakable. All three of us turned toward him. I froze. Amy tensed. My mother took in a deep breath, like she had just been caught backstage before a performance. But Brian didn't look at any of them. He walked into the room, stopped beside me, and said softly, "Emma, would you take a walk with me?" He said my name, not in anger, not in shock, in trust. The room went quiet. So quiet it felt like time stopped. That afternoon, the sky was a calm gray, like it was thinking about something it couldn't quite put into words. I led Brian down the path around the lake, where colorful leaves covered the ground and the scent of pine floated gently in the air. His hand rested lightly on my arm, not tightly, just enough to follow my pace like he already knew the rhythm of my steps. Neither of us spoke at first, but the silence didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. It felt like a soft space, safe enough for the truth to finally land. Then Brian spoke. "You know, Emma, I figured it out a long time ago." I stopped walking, but I didn't let go of his arm. "Since when?" I asked. My voice trembled a little, but it wasn't weak. He gave a quiet laugh. Not the kind that mocks, but the kind that says, "I already knew, I was just waiting to hear it from you. The day you made the tea differently. The way you touched my hand, like it meant something. The moment you mentioned purple chrysanthemums, a flower Amy once said was too plain." I swallowed hard. Pieces of the past rushed back, clear and sharp, like shattered glass reflecting 1,000 memories. "Then why didn't you say anything?" I asked. We had stopped by a stone bench under the red maple tree. He once told me it was his favorite place to read before he lost his sight. He ran his fingers gently along the edge of the bench and sat down. Because I didn't want to push you into confessing, he said quietly. I just needed to know one thing. Were you staying because you felt trapped? Because you were scared? Or because of me? I sat beside him, my hands shaking, but I didn't hide behind anyone's words anymore. No fake smiles. No borrowed perfume. No stolen voice. Just me. I'm sorry, I whispered. At first, I wasn't planning to stay. I was just a stand-in. A temporary fix. Someone they used. I stared at the lake. The surface was still like glass, not a single ripple. But then I saw you. Not the wealthy businessman everyone talks about. Not the blind man they treat like a burden or a miracle. I saw someone who lives in silence, but never quietly. Someone who listens better than anyone who's ever looked me in the eye. Brian didn't speak. He just turned his head slightly, like he was waiting. Not pressuring me. Just open. And I wasn't finished yet. I took a deep breath, steadying the shaking inside me. I lied to you, I said softly. I used my sister's name, her voice, her life, to step into yours. But everything I did after that, the breakfasts I made, the books I picked, the stories I shared, those were real. All of them were me. Brian turned his head toward me. Even though his eyes had never seen my face, I could feel something shift in them, like he had just heard a truth he'd been waiting for. Not with anger, not with pain, but with quiet acceptance. I barely got the words out. My name? It's not Amy. He nodded gently. I know. Then he looked up toward me. His voice wasn't cold. It was steady, deep, and calm. Emma. Just one word. But the way he said my name broke something open in me. It was like my world came crashing down and was rebuilt at the same time. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask why I did it or how I could lie to him. He just said my name like it was never a mistake, like it had always been meant to be mine. I looked at him. My eyes were burning. But this time, I didn't hold back the tears. He reached for me, slowly placing his hand over mine. His thumb brushed over my cold fingers like he was reassuring me, like he was telling me I was finally safe. Thank you for staying, he whispered. Even just for a moment. I held his hand a little tighter. If tomorrow you open your eyes and don't recognize me, I'll still be here. Because I'm tired of running. He didn't speak again. But he didn't let go either. His hand held mine a little firmer, like a promise was forming between us, even if neither of us had spoken it out loud. That morning, the sun was bright over Stamford Hospital. The windows glowed with golden light, but the hallway where I sat felt cold and unforgiving. I was trembling. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, my eyes locked on the recovery room door. Brian had been in surgery for nearly 7 hours. No one could say for sure what the outcome would be. The chances were unclear. But Brian believed, not in a miracle, not even in sight, but in hope. And maybe, just maybe, a part of that hope had been placed in me. When a nurse finally opened the door and gave me a nod, my heart sank and soared at the same time. I stood on legs that barely felt steady. Inside, the room was bright, too bright. Machines beeped rhythmically. Everything was clean, sterile, and still. He lay there in the bed, bandages still around his eyes, but the thick outer wrapping had been removed. I walked slowly to his bedside, afraid to even touch him. I just watched his chest rise and fall, praying the next breath would come, and the next. Then his eyelids fluttered. He blinked, slowly, carefully, as if every blink was a test. His pale blue eyes, once hidden in darkness, shimmered now, like they were adjusting to a world filled with light he hadn't seen in years. I didn't move. I didn't know if I was the first person he wanted to see or the last. He scanned the room slowly, adjusting to the brightness. Then his gaze landed on me. No surprise. No shock. Just recognition. Like he'd always known this was what I looked like. Like my face wasn't something new, but something he had imagined so many times it had become real long before this moment. I opened my mouth to speak, to apologize, to explain something, anything, but nothing came out. He was the one who spoke first. "You're not Amy." His voice was calm, soft, not angry, just certain. I nodded, my throat tight.
"No."
"I'm not." He kept looking at me, as if studying every part of me for the first time. Then he tilted his head slightly and said, "I know." Still, there was no anger in his voice. I stepped closer, resting my hand on the edge of the bed. I was going to leave right after the wedding. I didn't think I'd have the courage to stay. "But you did," he replied. His eyes never left mine. It felt like he was seeing straight through to my heart. I nodded slowly. "Because of you." He let out a breath, long and slow. Then he raised his hand just enough to let his fingers lightly touch mine. "There's something I've always been scared of," he said. "That if I ever saw again, the world would be different. That people who said they cared would be gone. That's what I trusted might have been fake." I gently held his hand. "I can't promise to be perfect, but I can promise to be real." He looked at me for a long moment, like he was reading the silence between my words. Then he said, "If tomorrow morning, when I wake up, you're still here, then stay. Not because I need you, but because I want us to begin again. From the start." My heart skipped. He didn't say, "If you explain more." He didn't say, "If you prove yourself." He just said, "If you're still here." I sat down in the chair beside his bed and took his hand in mine. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But my eyes caught the sunlight pouring through the window. Something new settled inside me. Not fear, not guilt, but quiet courage. "Then tomorrow morning, I'll be the first thing you see." He smiled. Not the kind I heard in his voice, but one I saw for the first time, with his eyes. 1 year later, on a misty April morning, I opened the front door of our small cabin, tucked into the pine forest just outside Ashland, Oregon. No cameras, no crowd, no grand wedding gowns, no pretending, just me,
"Emma."
living without masks. Our home was peaceful. It sat beside a calm lake, surrounded by red maple trees and tall pine giants. Forest birds sang every morning. The wind whispered stories between the branches. But what made this place feel magical wasn't the scenery. It was the people. We called it the Horizon Center, a place for people who had recently lost their vision. Brian chose the name. He said, "Even if someone can't see the horizon clearly, they still deserve to move toward their light." And that was exactly what we were doing. Moving forward. Together. At the Horizon Center, I handled orientation sessions for our new students. My job was to help them move through the world using sound, memory, and spatial awareness. I taught them to feel the direction of the wind, to listen to the echo of their footsteps, to sense the tiny vibrations in the ground with each step. Some of them came in scared, their eyes still trying to adjust to the darkness. But after a few weeks, many of them could walk to the lakeshore on their own. And then there was Brian. No program, no plan could explain what he became in this place. After his surgery, when he could see again, Brian didn't go back to big conferences or fancy business meetings. He didn't chase spotlights or headlines. Instead, he chose to stay right here. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, he taught music at the center. His class didn't have desks or whiteboards. Just a piano, a few wooden chairs, and a group of students who laughed and learned as he gently guided them into music through stories and sound. I often stood outside the classroom window, watching him run his fingers across the piano keys like he was playing old memories. Some mornings he didn't even teach. He just talked with the students about how sound had changed his life. And somehow, those conversations carried more meaning than any song. In the evenings, once all the classes were done, we sat on the porch with warm cups of tea in our hands, listening to the leaves rustling in the trees. Sometimes, we didn't say a word, but the silence never felt empty. It felt peaceful, like we finally understood each other in full. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and the sky turned pale gold, I asked him, "Do you ever miss your old life? Do you regret leaving all of it behind?" He didn't respond right away. He just looked out across the lake. His eyes were calm, still, like water that didn't need to ripple to hold meaning. No, he finally said. Back then, I lived in so much noise. But I never heard the one thing that truly mattered. I knew what he meant. He wasn't just talking about his old company or his old title.
He was talking about me.
Since the day we chose to be honest with each other, there had been no lies. No more pretending. No more
Amy.
No more hiding behind phone calls and a borrowed voice. Just me, Emma, the woman who once entered his life under pretenses, but stayed with her whole heart. Now and then, people visited the center, out of curiosity. They'd heard the story, how the blind millionaire married the wrong woman and somehow found true love anyway. Brian always smiled at them and invited them to join a class. Nobody ever left the same. I remember a young boy, once 12 years old, named Larry. He had recently lost his sight in an accident and was still adjusting to everything. One afternoon, during music class, he asked Brian, "Weren't you scared seeing someone who didn't look like how you imagined?" Brian gently placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, then turned toward me and said, "I saw the right person, just not at the right time." Larry didn't fully understand what that meant, but I did. Every day here was healing. Not just for those learning to move forward in a world without sight, but for me too, for someone who once believed she could only be loved by pretending to be someone else. And if someone were to ask me, "What's the greatest light you've ever found?" I'd say it's not the sun shining on the water or the way morning glows through the pines. It's Brian, the man who believed in me before he had ever seen me. The man who, to this day, still places my teacup on the left side of the table each morning because he remembers. One quiet autumn morning, when mist floated gently over the lake, I heard music coming from the classroom. It was a melody Brian only played on special days. It had no name, not happy, not sad, but like a story that still hadn't ended. I didn't go in right away. I stood outside the door listening. And in that moment, I didn't see Brian as the man who had once lost his sight. I didn't see the successful entrepreneur who gave up fame. I saw someone who was fully alive in every note he played.
He knew I was there.
When the music stopped, he turned his head toward me and smiled. "I'm writing the final part," he said. I stepped inside and sat beside him, resting my hand gently on the piano keys, not to play, but just to feel the warmth of the moment. "For the song?" I asked quietly. He nodded.
"For everything."
"For the life before, for the new beginning, and you." I looked down at my hands, the same hands that once shook with fear. Fear of being caught. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being unloved. Now they were steady. They had learned to hold on, not from pressure, but from trust. We kept writing that song, not with notes or paper, but with how we lived. With every class we taught. With every step we helped someone take. With every evening on the porch, where silence meant connection, not distance. Sometimes I still thought of Amy. She left again, this time on her terms. And I didn't blame her anymore. We all have our paths. Maybe she's finding her way back to herself, too. As for me, I've stopped needing to be perfect. I've stopped trying to be someone else. I don't need grand gestures or applause. I don't need the spotlight. All I needed was one person. Someone who could see me, without even opening his eyes. Someone who could love me, even after learning I had once been a lie. Someone who made me feel like that love was the most honest thing in a world full of doubt. And now, that's the life we live. Not perfect, but real. Here by the lake, under our simple wooden roof, we've built something strong, something steady. A love that doesn't need to shout. A love that speaks in quiet mornings and gentle music. A love that silences every voice that ever made me doubt my worth. Our story, mine and Brian's, isn't just about how love survived deception. It's about how truth can heal. In a world where appearances often lie, we choose to believe in something deeper, something we can't see. Forgiveness.
Honesty.
The courage to be real. And the hope that love doesn't need perfect conditions to grow. It just needs to be chosen. Because sometimes, the brightest light doesn't come through the eyes. It comes from a heart that knows, finally and completely, that it's found home.